Hey, what's up everyone, back with another Bitcoin update. Just a very quick reminder, if you guys and girls are liking these Bitcoin updates, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell as every second counts from the moment these videos are uploaded. So basically, we did get that dump from yesterday's analysis. What's next? Right now, Bitcoin has made a pretty significant drop on the intraday and quite arguably a bit too deep for my liking for this diagonal idea, since we have been discussing from yesterday's analysis and starting to go into the leading expanding diagonal territory, which is the next variation for Bitcoin's pattern of choice, where instead of the contracting nature, where we breached the $60,000 level, we are now starting to go into the expanding diagonal territory, where we start to create the expanding nature or the next expanding type variation for the diagonal. And the problem with these leading expanding diagonals is that they are far rare when trying to presume they will be in play, meaning due to the probability of hit rates of these leading expanding diagonals, statistically, we should be going into the alternative scenario we shared yesterday, which is the idea of creating the 1-2 idea as a flat idea. We discussed this yesterday if we are continuing the bullish narration. But since it's not technically invalidated, we still have to monitor it and we can still discuss it, but it is becoming an alternative idea because I personally don't like these expanding diagonals. If we start to come a bit deeper, we did hit the 786 pretty much on point, and that is an area of interest when we are looking for a balance within these expanding diagonals when taking the Fibonacci retracements of the previous and preceding waves. But right now, since it is still valid, it is something that we still have to monitor. But for the most part, we did get that drop, and now we have to look for what kind of move this move may be on the micro time frames. So what's important is that we got the general direction of our push to the upside and then to the pullback as well. However, we need to now understand, like I've said, what the next structure may be and what we may be in as we are now going deeper into the previous wave territory. So let's just get this diagonal idea out of the way. Again, we need to look for a 3-wave move down to the downside. Technically, we can fit in 3 waves into the structure when looking on the local time frames. However, it is starting to look impulsive. Now, that is the drawback when you're looking for these waves, the hybrid waves, because waves 1, 2, and 3 can also overlap, and most times will overlap with the characteristic of an ABC. So we've seen these happen over here, and like this move here was very impulsive, could have been a corrective structure as well, part of the wave Y. We really don't know until we actually get the moves off the lows. So if you guys remember, I mentioned that if we start to lose this contracting nature and starts to look impulsive, we have to shift focus and go into the idea of the flat idea, which works on the C wave, which is the actionary wave in itself. So that is how we have to define how these are going to be playing out based on probability alone. So if that's the case, we discussed this idea being a very high probability idea where this may be a flat idea, where we are going to be working for this impulsive structure here. So if that's the case, we're looking for what seems to be still in a wave 3, as we really want to be creating a new price extreme for this wave C, as we already created this price extreme for wave B, went into that B pocket expanded zone of the 123.6% and the 138.2% very, very nicely. So that is why we deemed this as a very high possibility. If we started to lose the contracting nature, we talked about the idea that this may be impulsive, so we have to work on that idea as well. So if we're still working in a wave 3, we're going to be expecting some kind of wave 4 to play out, and then looking for a wave 5 to the downside and looking for that C wave to finish, and that will be our wave 2 of the primary degree, where this move here in the Elliott wave sequence of a 3, 3, 5 structure. Again, this 5 structure meaning that we're looking for 5 waves to the downside. That's the impulsive actionary wave for the wave C. That's what we're looking for this wave 2 to conclude for the primary wave 1, 2, instead of having that diagonal where we're working in a very tight range before we get that larger 1, 2 pullback. I did mention yesterday in yesterday's analysis that these levels, no matter what, even if we did create the contracting nature, we're going to look for a 1, 2 pullback regardless, and eventually meet us in the same type of typical typical range for that wave 1-2 pullback. And just similarly for this flat idea, just working a bit faster, we are now working into that possible 61.8% zone and in between that 78.6% zone. But ideally, if we're using the trend-based Fibonacci extension where we're taking the pivot of wave 1, pivot of wave A, and pivot of wave B, we get that measurement that leads us into the very common target of the 161.8 zone, which lines up very nicely and coincidentally with the 61.8 zone of the normal Fibonacci retracement from this bottom to this assumed top. So as this is looking like the assumed top right now, it is starting to look like that this zone is going to be a major interest for bulls as well. So we'll have to see what kind of reaction or price reaction we get off of these lows. Now, we did hit the 100% target, which is also a very interesting zone for the micro time frames, that is, because if we take the pivot of wave A and B as a normal Fibonacci retracement, we did hit the 61.8 and 78.6. So there is a lot of overlap for that contracting variation of the diagonal and also the leading expanding diagonal. So that idea, again, still has to be monitored because on the local time frames, if we do find support, we still have to work within that contracting variation or the leading expanding variation of that diagonal. And we may, technically we could still be working in that idea where we're just going for a technical bounce very soon because it is still working very correctively. But the important thing is that this is the first time we've actually had the characteristic of a possible impulse, which is why I discussed the idea for that possible flat idea, which you see here. So if that's the case, again, in Elliott Wave fashion sequence of that 3-3-5 structure, we're just looking for a 5-way move to the downside. Again, it's pretty difficult to count an entire 5-way move to the downside. We just have to wait because there is a possibility that this can also be a running flat idea where we have the C wave terminate early and above that termination point of wave A and have the wave 2 here. And that 100% zone could be technically as a running flat where we create a price extreme for wave B, but we don't create a price extreme for wave C. This would be the same 3-3-5 structure where we come up, and that would be the wave 2. However, since that is quite rare, we are looking for the possibility of coming back into this zone over here since it is looking quite impulsive in nature. So this wave 2, again, we're going to be looking for the 161.8 zone as the common wave C target of this ABC. In relation to this wave A, we're looking for the 161.8% of that Fibonacci extension that is in relation to that wave A, as the partner legs are very important when discussing Fibonacci in general. So if that's the case, we're going to be looking for these levels here of high liquidity. There is some area of confluence in these regions here as well as the 61.8% is very important. So if we go back to the diagonal idea, it is again starting to lose that contracting nature. I haven't done the measurements myself, but it is starting to look a little bit more expanding in kind of characteristic, but it is starting to lose that 3-wave variation type within this zone right here. We would really ideally need to be creating possibly a very long wave A or wave a long wave A, but a very short wave C to really confirm this idea of a wave 4 that can be creating that contracting or that expanding variation where technically any variation is going to be valid until that subwave 2 is breached. So if that's the case, very simply put, if we do breach this subwave 2, automatically we're going to be assuming that the flat idea is in play no matter what, and that would already start to look like it's concluding at that point. But if we do stay above this region here, we're still technically working in a very albeit rare pattern of an expanding variation, and we need to be creating a pretty strong price reaction off of the support. If we do get supported above this subwave 2, this has to be longer now than this wave 3. So what that means is the rules and guidelines have changed. If the expanding variation comes into play, the contracting variation, the wave 5 has to be shorter than this wave 3, but in the expanding variation, this wave 5 now has to be longer than this wave 3. So if that's the case, we're looking for that 1-2 pullback eventually to happen again, even with the expanding variation, and we're still going to be coming back into these regions regardless. So there's going to be a lot of fighting back and forth between the bulls and bears. So if that's the case, that is how the variation of the diagonal will play out. But again, I am still looking at this idea as now kind of the primary idea, as we are still kind of in between two hybrid scenarios within the flat idea in itself of a running flat and possibly the the normal expanded flat where we create that new price extreme for the wave C. So I would say that is the way to look at it, ladies and gentlemen. There's really not much to update. We did get the general idea of a pullback. It's kind of a waiting game to see what kind of reaction we get off the lows. The trading strategy in itself is pretty simple. If we get a five-way move off of these lows here, that's going to be the first wave of confirmation as a wave 1, and then wave 2 is ideally where you want to be getting in. If we don't even get this, then there's no point in entering a long position anyways for the idea of a running flat anyways. Once we get into these regions of the major Fibonacci level, then that idea starts to become a little bit more relevant in terms of the risk management, because if you get this move off of the lows here, you can still take a pretty small swing trade in the case it doesn't just breach, but you do have a better risk reward management at that point as well. Again, you want to be looking for 5 waves up and then a 1-2 pullback once we do reach these levels here, and that will be the confirmation. Ideally, you want to be getting into that 1-2 within this move here, and then that'll be the wave 3, so you can catch that next move of the highest profitable wave 3. So that's how we're going to be looking at it, ladies and gentlemen. This idea of the flat idea is now starting to become a little bit more relevant in terms of the primary idea. The diagonal idea is still there. This does still have that contracting nature. However, it is looking less likely. With the push back to the downside a little bit further, that will be giving us or putting us into more rarer territory of the expanding diagonal. It's still valid until that wave 2 gets invalidated. So that is something to look at if you are still considered a bull at these regions here, whatever technical indicator that you may be looking at. But again, this is looking a little bit more impulsive than correctively, but we don't know until we actually get the bounce or actual dump to the downside. But right now, we have discussed the idea of this pullback we did since our last analysis. Now we're going to be kind of monitoring on where and how this does an impulse off of the lows. So hopefully that was helpful, ladies and gentlemen. Please give a thumbs up and also make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. These subscriptions that you guys are giving for this channel does help the channel a lot. Gives me a lot of motivation to create more videos for these videos and on the daily. So if you are interested also joining the XForce Discord membership, the link is in the description below, where I will do more technical updates on the micro time frames and also on X at XForceGlobal. Please do give me a follow there if you want to discuss more engaged conversations on how these patterns are playing out. Also, if you're interested in joining the Patreon, I do Wednesday and Friday updates separately. That does go a little bit deeper into the analysis. But for now, the general updates have been given. Hopefully that was helpful. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a fantastic rest of the week. Bye-bye.